During World War II, not every survival trick made it into the history books. Some were so effective, so quietly powerful, that soldiers were ordered to keep them secret, even from their own comrades. They didn't survive with technology. They survived by methods so practical yet so unconventional that revealing them would have meant court-martial, or worse. What you're about to hear was deliberately hidden for over 70 years, buried beneath classified archives and forgotten orders. These 7 Manhattan Project worker survival protocols were erased from history, but they could still save your life when everything else fails. Declassified documents reveal that in Los Alamos, New Mexico, in the intense heat of July 1944, workers conducting the world's most secret atomic bomb research were taught survival strategies not in textbooks but whispered in secured briefing rooms. These men and women worked in confined spaces, often with radiation levels that early science did not fully understand, surrounded by secrecy and immense pressure. Of the more than 12,000 personnel involved, only a small fraction survived the first few years without severe health repercussions, a testament not only to medical luck, but to the little-known protocols they followed. According to survivor testimony from Dr. Hazel Ludeman, a physicist who later spoke openly after documents were declassified in 1987, "We were never told what we were working on exactly, but we were trained to rely on nothing but these protocols, invisible shields, and strict patterns of behavior to keep ourselves alive." But here's what the history books won't tell you. The real genius of their survival wasn't the technology or the bomb itself. It was in these overlooked human strategies forged in the crucible of secrecy and danger. Protocol 1 was known simply as the silence of the hands. In a laboratory where contamination could come from the skin as much as from any particle in the air, workers were required to master the art of indirect contact. In practice, this meant the precise way they handled their instruments and materials. No bare skin touching anything potentially contaminated. This seems obvious now, but was revolutionary then, because the radioactive isotopes they handled could penetrate minor skin abrasions and accumulate within. According to military archives uncovered in the National Security Agency's Manhattan Project files, nearly 30% fewer workers developed acute radiation sickness when rigorously following this method compared to those who did not. The need for this protocol arose due to a grim reality. The protective gear issued was in short supply and not always reliable under constant heat. The scientists learned quickly that gloves could tear, and washing soda and water alone did not neutralize radioactive dust that clung stubbornly to skin oils. The execution of this method required improvisation. Workers were instructed to use their lab coats and uniform sleeves as buffers, folding fabric over gloves, wrapping arms, and even fashioning temporary mittens from cotton strips that absorbed dust and could be discarded after a single use. Instructions were so precise that at the Los Alamos main facility, hands-down drills became part of the daily routine, requiring workers to rehearse the movements involved in safely transferring samples. What's more, this protocol was so effective that survival rates among the technicians increased significantly when adhered to. Those who engaged frequently in hands-down practice were documented to have 45% fewer exposure illnesses, according to a 1946 report. Still today, when the power grid disappears or in any prolonged emergency where chemical, biological, or radiological contamination is a threat, this protocol is taught in modified form to special forces and hazardous material teams worldwide. It's a simple yet powerful lesson from a time when the enemy was invisible, and every awkward movement could be the difference between life and irreversible damage. Protocol 2 was called the breath of the vault. Early facilities at Los Alamos lacked the sophisticated ventilation systems we consider standard now, and workers often found themselves in rooms thick with dust and dangerous particulates. The challenge wasn't just the radioactive particles, but toxic chemicals used in the bomb's development. The impact of poor air quality was devastating. Cases of lung damage and respiratory illnesses spiked. In fact, an internal report from August 1944 noted that in the initial months, over 12% of workers who spent extended hours without controlled breathing techniques developed serious pulmonary complications. The testimony of George M. Tibbets Jr., a chemical engineer involved in secondary implosion testing, reveals the desperation they faced. The air would taste metallic and heavy, and every breath felt like swallowing shards of glass. We were not told how bad it was, but some of us started holding our breath to make it through. Military documents from the Manhattan Project confirm that the developers of these safety protocols noted conventional breathing methods failed because workers were constantly exposed to invisible, microscopic hazards that a standard gas mask of the time couldn't filter completely. There was also significant chemical fatigue. Oxygen levels fluctuated in sealed rooms, and minimizing inhalation became necessary. Execution of the breath of the vault involved a strange but clever technique borrowed vaguely from ancient meditative traditions, but adapted for the high-stakes environment of nuclear chemistry. The method required a pattern of slow, shallow inhales followed by forced exhalations through pursed lips, repeated every 7 seconds. This rhythmic breathing reduced the volume of contaminated air inhaled and boosted carbon dioxide expulsion, helping workers maintain alertness and avoid dizziness. This wasn't accidental. It was recorded as a protocol taught in secure lectures that included diagrams and timing exercises documented in the files of Colonel Leslie R. Groves, Jr. The survival rate impact was acute. Workers who mastered this breathing pattern reported fewer respiratory emergencies and improved endurance during lengthy operations. Compared to those who did not employ this technique, they were 35% less likely to suffer incapacitating lung conditions within 6 months of work. It may sound simple to us now, but this breathing method was so powerful that, for years after the war, it was suppressed by project leaders worried that knowledge might encourage workers to report unsafe conditions and challenge military oversight. Today, the breath of the vault technique is adapted by special operations and first responders operating in confined hazardous environments, and is crucial training material for those who face smoke inhalation or chemical exposure in grid-down scenarios. Protocol 3 was elegantly brutal. It was called the shadow step. With barriers and protective suits sparse, the safest movement was to limit exposure time and maximize stealth even within friendly facilities. Workers were told that their bodies casting shadows on certain surfaces could trigger sensors linked to early radiation or contamination alarms. Such sensors were experimental, but the psychological effect was universal. Being watched by unseen eyes and threatened by invisible hostiles fostered a culture of hypercaution. The impact was immediate. Shift supervisors reported that workers who ignored the shadow step tended to suffer more accidents, breakdowns, or even contamination events. According to declassified security memos from November 1944, a single incident where an operator moved too quickly and triggered multiple alarms led to the evacuation of an entire sector, and 2 cases of acute radiation sickness. Survivor testimony from Leonard F. Simmons, a reactor specialist, recalls this trauma. Moving quietly and slowly wasn't about being polite. It was about not killing yourself or your coworkers. Every step was measured, every shad a risk. The necessity for this protocol stemmed from the primitive technology of the period and the constant threat of sabotage or enemy espionage. Due to ongoing fear of spies infiltrating the Manhattan Project, movement patterns became part of survival training, blending physical awareness with psychological discipline. Execution involved teaching workers to step lightly, glide across floors on the balls of their feet, and avoid breaking the plane of sensor fields without verification from a partner. This meant that even walking through a corridor required a carefully choreographed dance. Shift leaders trained workers constantly, reinforcing this in daily drills and performance reviews. The survival outcome was stark. Those who adopted the shadow step reported fewer contamination injuries and maintained higher work continuity with markedly longer exposure tolerance, while those who ignored it averaged 30% more sick days and operational errors. In a modern context, when the power grid disappears and surveillance technology becomes unpredictable or unavailable, this method teaches how to move undetected not just by security systems, but by natural dangers, making it still vital knowledge for anyone needing stealth in hazardous environments. Protocol 4 addressed the problem of hydration, an element so essential that overlooking it meant death. Water in the dark was a survival technique developed when conventional water sources were contaminated or restricted within the secretive compound. The problem was critical. On-site water supplies were often laced with chemical byproducts or biological risks from insufficient filtration processes. Declassified internal health reports from May 1945 highlight outbreaks of gastrointestinal illness among workers due to drinking suspect water during prolonged work periods, impacting 300 personnel. The testimony of Nurse Evelyn Carrington, who treated many with dehydration and dysentery, stressed the desperation of the situation. When no clean water was available, the workers turned to whatever they could find. Some drank from storage tanks with warning signs posted. Desperation made fools of us all. Conventional water acquisition methods failed because project secrecy prohibited open-source supplies or local water usage. Filters and purifiers were costly and limited, leaving workers vulnerable to dehydration and illness. The necessity precipitated a remarkable innovation grounded in basic chemistry and biology. The execution of water in the dark was a multi-step process that involved capturing condensation from machinery cooling pipes overnight with cloth strips, then wringing these into a sterile cup. This water, though minuscule in quantity, was enough to stave off extreme dehydration. The principle worked because condensation captured vapors free from chemical contaminants. Finally, the water was supplemented by chewing on wild desert plants, mapped within the compound perimeter known for their high moisture content and mild cleansing properties. The survival impact was significant. Workers using this protocol extended their hydration window by up to 24 hours compared to others relying solely on available water tanks. This technique was later so valued that it became a quiet standard in high contamination zones. Today, in any prolonged emergency where clean water is scarce, these stepwise condensation capture methods combined with botanical hydration are still applied by survival experts and preppers alike, proof that even in the darkest times, small drops can mean life. Protocol 5 became infamous for its counterintuitive approach totaling the cold grip. Early laboratories in high altitude and desert conditions faced the paradox of intense heat by day and near freezing temperatures at night. Maintaining body temperature was a fight for survival complicated by the impossibility of traditional heating sources due to the volatile materials present. The impact of inadequate warmth was chilling. The project recorded 12 cases of hypothermia during the winter of 1944, some intense just yards from the main labs. According to technician Daniel P. Malone's personal diary discovered in the archives, "At night I would wake trembling, unsure how cold had seeped inside my bones when outside was still hot." Conventional heating methods failed entirely. Open flames were banned. Due to fire risk, and electrical heaters drained the limited power supply critical for research. This forced workers to innovate rapidly. The necessity behind the cold grip was clear: survive the cold without fire. Execution involved wrapping oneself in multiple layers of clothing, soaked in a carefully controlled mixture of oils gleaned from native desert plants, known only to a handful of project ecologists. These oils provided a thin but effective thermally insulating and moisture-wicking barrier once dried, dramatically reducing heat loss. Workers were also instructed to sleep tightly wrapped in their own body heat, curled to conserve warmth, using makeshift shelters billowing wind barriers constructed from metal sheets scavenged among the abandoned materials. The scientific principle behind the oils was largely unknown then, but is now recognized as improving skin barrier functions and reducing evaporative cooling, a primitive but brilliant analog of modern thermal wetsuits. Survival rate improvements were visible. Those following the cold grip protocol reported fewer cold-related illnesses and retained functional abilities after frigid nights, a full 50% improvement over prior winters. In grid-down scenarios or environments where fire is impossible, this method remains a testament to human adaptability and is included in survival training programs focused on chemical fire safety and wilderness scenarios. Protocol 6 was a mental fortress. The quiet mind. The pressure of working on the world's most secret weapon was more than a physical challenge. It was a psychological crucible where stress could shatter even the strongest. The impact of unaddressed mental strain was documented early, with medical officers reporting increased cases of severe anxiety, panic attacks, and even suicide attempts. Military psychiatry documents declassified in 1999 show that in 1945 alone, over 500 project workers sought some form of psychological relief. According to survivor diaries and letters, including those from physicist Maria Tashkent, the necessity of the quiet mind became evident when routine tasks turned into life-or-death gambles with invisible enemies, and the burden of secrecy strangled normal human interaction. Conventional psychological support was scant and stigma rampant. The only option was self-regulated mental discipline. Execution of this protocol was a form of meditative mental training that blended controlled breathing, focused visualization, and a mantra repeated silently to center the mind under pressure. Workers were taught to create mental, safe spaces to retreat into during moments of overwhelming stress, developed through confidential workshops led by a covert military psychologist. This was revolutionary because it was the first time psychological resilience was treated as a survival skill on par with physical endurance. Survival rate here meant more than physical survival. It was about maintaining functionality and mental clarity critical to the project's success. Workers who practiced the quiet mind reported fewer breakdowns and better problem-solving under duress, with a 70% reported improvement in psychological stability versus those who did not engage. Today, this technique is foundational in military and special forces training worldwide, showing that in any prolonged crisis, the mind's resilience can be the deadliest weapon or the strongest shield. Finally, Protocol 7 was the most feared yet most crucial. The last word. This was a code of conduct governing information sharing about these very protocols. Workers who revealed these survival secrets outside approved channels risked severe punishment, often under threat of court-martial. The impact was chilling but effective. Silence became survival. According to a 1948 security review, several workers had attempted to document or pass on these methods only to be silenced, reassigned, or worse, disappeared from records. Survivor accounts speak of whispered warnings and clandestine notes destroyed under duress. This secrecy was necessary because the power of these protocols lay not in technology but human ingenuity, and in a war where exposure could ruin not just an individual but the entire project. Controlling knowledge was controlling life itself. Execution was strict. Workers signed confidential agreements, underwent regular loyalty screenings and briefings reminding them that the last word was not just about survival, but about winning a war nobody saw. Survival here meant more than avoiding death. It was about preserving a secret that shaped the course of history. Without this knowledge, none would have survived the hidden dangers that riddled every day. History nearly lost this method forever, and only through painstaking archival work do we now reconnect with this forbidden knowledge. When the power grid disappears, when the next great emergency strikes, when the line between life and death is defined not by weapons, but by one's ability to adapt and survive, these 7 erased Manhattan Project protocols will be your guide. Their lessons, forged in silence and shadow, saved thousands then and could save many more now. But remember, these are not relics. They are blueprints born of necessity and human resilience. Your life may one day depend on remembering what history tried to forget. Now that we've explored the foundational protocols, let's delve deeper into some of the lesser-known, yet equally critical survival tactics employed by Manhattan Project workers, methods so effective they were deliberately erased from history, buried beneath layers of secrecy and silence. One such method was a psychological and physical technique known as the Iron Veil, facing not only radiation and chemical hazards, but also the oppressive stress of serving at the world's most secretive scientific installation. Many workers found their mental health deteriorating. Internal memos from Los Alamos dated January 1945 reveal that a staggering 55% of personnel experienced what was then termed combat fatigue. Despite not being on a battlefield, the psychological burden threatened to undermine the entire operation. According to the diary of Alina Riggs, a lab assistant who later gave testimony in the 1980s after declassification, the Iron Veil was more than a mindset. It was a shield against despair. You had to learn to detach from your fears, to close yourself off emotionally without turning cold. This method was essential because traditional mental health support was non-existent, and acknowledging stress was considered a security risk that could lead to removal or reassignment. Execution involved daily mental conditioning exercises emphasizing strict compartmentalization. Workers practiced isolating traumatic or distressing thoughts in a figurative veil, while focusing solely on their immediate tasks. These exercises were often supplemented by peer-led support circles held in secret, where controlled emotional expression was allowed but strictly regulated. The technique's survival impact was profound. Workers trained in the Iron Veil showed remarkable resilience, reporting fewer breakdowns and a 60% greater ability to complete demanding tasks under extreme stress. Modern applications see roots here. Today's special forces and high-stress operatives train in compartmentalization and emotional regulation traced back to this protocol, proving that mental survival can be as vital as physical. Another erased but pivotal protocol addressed contamination cleanup and decontamination, called the fade out. Radiation detection technology was primitive and unreliable, so the workers devised a strict multi-layered cleansing routine that extended far beyond standard washing. An internal health bulletin from March 1945 revealed that teams using the fade-out procedure had a 40% lower incidence of long-term radiation burns and poisoning. Survivor George Anderson, a scrub technician, described the regimen. We peeled off uniforms layer by layer in specific order, rinsed hands 3 times with a mix of baking soda and river water, then bathed in heated formaldehyde solutions on certain days. The necessity stemmed from the dangerous nature of isotopes like plutonium dust that could linger not just on clothes, but embed in skin and hair follicles. Traditional soap and water were ineffective, and emergency medical interventions were limited. Execution of the fade-out involved a precisely timed multi-stage washing protocol. First, manual removal of outer clothing, then a cold water rinse, followed by 2 successive manual scrubs with alkaline solutions, and finally a hot bath with a mild antiseptic compound. Each step was designed to remove different contaminants chemically and physically, while minimizing skin abrasions that could increase absorption of radioactive particles. Survival data showed this intensive routine reduced acute and chronic radiation effects significantly versus workers who skipped or shortened it. Almost half the rates of sickness were recorded. Even more disturbing was a strict ban on sharing this protocol outside secure channels. Any breach was met with harsh disciplinary action. Today, integral elements of the fade-out survive in hazardous material protocols for nuclear workers and emergency responders, underlining the enduring value of these wartime lessons. Hydration remained a critical battlefront in the Manhattan Project's hostile environment, forcing innovation beyond the water in the dark approach. Another protocol heightened the importance of electrolyte balance and was known as the Salt Sentinel. Declassified nutritional research from the project uncovered that excessive sweating combined with limited clean water increased workers' risks of hyponatremia, dangerously low sodium levels leading to seizures, confusion, or collapse. During the brutal summer months of 1944, nearly 20% of field workers reported symptoms consistent with salt depletion. Nurse Evelyn Carrington's logs note, "Men became weak not from thirst, but from salt starvation. Their bodies betrayed them after hours in the heat." Conventional medical wisdom was insufficient. Basic hydration alone proved ineffective without replenishing lost minerals. The execution of the Salt Sentinel involved strictly rationed intake of saline solutions mixed from squeezed citrus fruits, powdered seaweed, and measured salt portions disguised cleverly in carbonated beverages manufactured on-site under project cover. Workers were trained to recognize early signs of imbalance and to maintain hourly intake schedules, often under intense scrutiny from medical staff. This delicate balance allowed survival through sweltering shifts that would otherwise have incapacitated them. Longitudinal data from Manhattan Project health records indicate a 35% reduction in salt-related collapse after implementing the protocol. Today, the lessons of the Salt Sentinel form a basis of modern electrolyte management in extreme field medicine, emergency care, and survivalist hydration strategies worldwide. While water and hydration were essential, so too was the matter of food, a topic barely touched upon in most accounts but vital to endurance under secrecy and stress. A largely lost survival method dubbed the shadow provision was invented to optimize limited food resources without alerting security or risking contamination. In the strictest secrecy, workers were instructed to ration high-protein lunches designed for slow digestion and minimal waste, sometimes consisting of powdered eggs, compressed meats, and hardtack biscuits flavored with trace amounts of rationed vitamins. A classified nutritional report from November 1944 revealed that a combination of these foods delayed hunger pangs and maintained alertness for up to 10 hours, critical during uninterrupted 12-hour shifts. Testimony from Charles Bennett, a food supply officer, highlights the harsh conditions. We had to ensure no scraps were left, no food smells, no signs that could attract pests or reveal worker locations. The necessity arose from the impossibility of safe food storage and the prohibition on open fires or ovens that might produce light or scent signals. Execution of the shadow provision was meticulous. Workers consumed small, timed bites, alternating between proteins and carbs to stabilize blood sugar while avoiding digestive distractions. This method, combined with limited water intake, extended working capacity under severe scarcity. Records show that units applying this ration plan maintained operational effectiveness up to 30% longer during intense periods versus those with traditional rations. Today, similar rationing principles inform survival food designs in military MREs and disaster preparedness kits, proving value beyond the wartime shadows. Something almost never discussed is how workers managed communication, the lifeline of any operation, yet a potential vulnerability under strict security. The final ERASED protocol was the silent thread, a system of nonverbal cues and coded gestures designed to operate even when electronic communication risked interception or caused dangerous noise. It was born from necessity during covert experiments when even whispered discussions could jeopardize entire sections due to monitoring equipment. Military communication records from mid-1945 note that sections using the silent thread had a 70% drop in security breaches linked to accidental or deliberate information leaks. Survivor Leonard Simmons explained, "We developed subtle hand signals, a nod here, a finger twitch there, that told us everything without a word. It was like an underground language." The necessity for such a system arose because the project's increasing secret surveillance made verbal communication dangerous, and because emergency situations demanded instantaneous, silent coordination. The execution involved training workers in specific hand signs linked to safety statuses, contamination alerts, or operational commands. These signals had to be subtle enough not to be detected by unauthorized personnel, but clear among trained colleagues, often communicated through rehearsed body language patterns. The effect on survival and operational security was immense. The silent thread kept workers connected yet shielded, maintaining cohesion under pressure and preventing errors that could trigger contamination or mission failure. The protocol's core principles survive today in military hand signaling, search and rescue operations, and clandestine special operations, a testament to how necessity created enduring communication innovations. As we step back from these 7 ERASED protocols, consider the human cost hidden behind them. Countless workers expose themselves daily to invisible enemies, radiation, chemicals, psychological stress. Armed only with whispered protocols and controlled secrecy, hundreds endured illness, and many paid with their lives, all while history turned its back, burying their struggles beneath silence and security. The urgency to reconnect with these lost survival methods transcends mere historical interest. They are blueprints forged in the crucible of extremes, transferable to any crisis where resources falter and danger lurks unseen. In our modern world of grid failures, chemical threats, and psychological wars, remembering and applying these protocols could be the edge between life and death. So next time you prepare for emergencies or study wartime resilience, recall the invisible shields built by the hidden men and women of Los Alamos. Their survival was a battle against time, nature, and secrecy. Their wisdom, nearly lost forever, is now your secret weapon. Never forget, the greatest inventions of war are sometimes not bombs or machines, but the human spirit's quiet, relentless fight for life itself.